So thank you both for joining me today. That's really kind of you to give up your time and join me on the channel. So today, guys, we're joined by Lorraine Richardson and Stuart Forsdike, who specialise in conveyancing. And today they'll give us an insight as to how coronavirus is impacting on the conveyancing process for those of you that are thinking of buying property or are midway through your property purchase. I thought it would be really useful to share some of their experiences. So it's also worth me mentioning as well that Lorraine and Stuart do have a YouTube channel which is called Conveyancing Matters. So check that out for those of you that are interested to know more about conveyancing. Thank you both for joining us.
No problem.
Thank you. And yeah, first of all, I guess just if you can give us a quick introduction. So starting with yourself, Stuart, if you can tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, okay, so my name's Stuart Forsdike and I'm a partner at PCS Legal. We're a law firm situated in London and Essex. We've got offices in Basildon, Ongar, Wickford, London, and we specialise in conveyancing, which is the legal process behind buying and selling houses.
Fantastic. And Lorraine, if you can just do a quick introduction.
Yeah, hi Nikki, thanks so much for inviting us. Yeah, my name is Lorraine Richardson and I'm slightly different beast to Stu. I'm a property solicitor, been doing it for years, but I also have done a lot of training, a lot of property courses and training and so on. So I now combine the two. I finally left practice full-time a couple of years ago. I've now set up my own training company called Adapt Law. So now what I do, Nikki, is mix the two. So I locum for conveyancing firms, obviously doing conveyancing, but I also offer training and of course now do conveyancing matters with the lovely, gorgeous Stu. So a really lovely range of things for me.
Brilliant. So I'm going to kick off today's interview by coming first of all to yourself, Lorraine. And it's worth me asking because so many of my clients, they come to me for a mortgage. They get confused. What's the difference between a conveyancer or a solicitor? Do I need both? Are they two separate things? Can you shed some light on that for us? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, sure, Nikki, I'd be happy to. It's very straightforward. Conveyancer is basically the umbrella term, if you like, for people who are qualified to do conveyancing work. And broadly, there are solicitors who can do all sorts of legal work, but you know, those that specialise in conveyancing would be called a conveyancer. You've got legal executives who can qualify into specialist areas, and again, conveyancing be one of those. And you've got specialist property lawyers like Stu called licensed conveyancers who have qualified and are specialists in conveyancing specifically. So there are various people that do conveyancing work as well, of course, as huge numbers of fantastic paralegals and support staff. But really, Nikki, conveyancer is the sort of umbrella term. But the reality is that for people buying and selling houses, broadly speaking, they're going to need a qualified property lawyer to help them, which is why they would go to a legal firm, be it a firm of solicitors or a firm of licensed conveyancers.
Okay, so it's understandable the roles are interchangeable. They can, cross over.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, Stuart, coming over to you next, can you just give us a bit of an insight as to what role a conveyancer plays in the house buying process? What do you actually do as an overview?
Yeah, of course. So once you found the house of your dreams in terms of buying or if you're selling a property, the next step's the legal process. So I suppose it's the boring part, really. But of course, you know, it's not an insignificant amount of money that people are spending. So we need to make sure that that property that they're buying is fit for purpose and that there's no problems with it. So we act on behalf of the client and the bank, making sure that the property they're buying doesn't have any problems, so that once they've bought it, they can enjoy it and move in with no issues ahead.
Okay.
Actually, Nikki, it's probably worth saying, just in the interest of shameless plug, and it's really interesting you picked those two questions first, because actually Stu and I have done sort of longer conveyancing matters chats on actually both of those questions specifically. So, you know, what is a conveyancer and what does the conveyancer do? So if any of your lovely viewers are interested in a bit more info, then they can scrabble around on YouTube and find us under Conveyancing Matters. So we answer it more fully as well. So hopefully that will help people.
Definitely, I'm sure that the viewers would find a more detailed chat on both of those questions useful, so that's good. Okay, so guys, tell us then, with everything that's happening in the strange world that we're living in at the moment, what is the biggest challenge for you as conveyancers throughout this pandemic?
Do you want to take that one first, Stu?
Yeah, of course. So what people don't often realise is that the conveyancing process, it's long-winded at the best of times. So on average, somebody's looking probably 2-3 months at least to get from when they've found that property that they want to buy or sell to actually moving in. It's a long process. It takes at least 3 months. That process takes that amount of time because there's many different parties that are involved in the transaction. Now, that was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the world we now live in, when we have to contact, whether it be local authorities, banks, building societies, search companies, landlords, management agents, all the different people that are involved, they've had people on furlough, they've got additional workloads that, for example, the stamp duty holidays created a massive influx of buyers. The market's really buoyant at the moment. So everybody's just super, super busy. So from our point of view, a job that would normally take that 2 to 3 months, unfortunately, and it's, nobody likes this, and particularly us. But unfortunately now, the UK average is 19 weeks. And it's just because it takes so long to get through to everybody. A call to somebody's bank before completion to make sure monies are going to arrive in time for completion. It will now take an hour to get through, whereas previously it might be 5-10 minutes. So it's difficult circumstances that we're working in.
Yeah, sure. I think as well, a lot of people probably underestimate that you guys do work with so many third parties as well. So you can't always control every single aspect of what you're doing, and people don't always realise that.
Definitely. It's like a wheel with lots of different spokes in it. So, there's local authorities, there's the land registry, there's the inland revenue. There are so many different people that are involved in a transaction. And ultimately, this is why it takes so long.
Stu, actually, didn't you count it was something like 19 different parties?
That's right. I think on a chat we recently had, we worked out there were 19 different people or bodies that were involved in a conveyancing transaction. So from a real basic point of view, if you think that's 19 people that we might contact, whether that be by telephone, by email, and we're waiting, at different periods for all of these people to reply and the sort of backwards and forwards, if you like. So yeah, there are plenty of people involved, and of course, a lot of that is behind the scenes. So the average client wouldn't even know about sort of the stuff that we may be doing for them. And of course, now the challenge is for us is to manage expectations and to tell clients this is what we're doing, but unfortunately, we're waiting on this person, waiting on that person.
Sure. Okay. So I think one of the key points there is if you are buying during the pandemic, you definitely have to be patient.
I think, yeah, definitely. I think there's two things. It's being patient, but it's also sort of being prepared as well. And I know we're going to go on to talk about that a bit later in this conversation, but being prepared and actually getting everything sorted, before you buy or before you engage in the legal works equally is important as well.
Okay, brilliant. So you've kind of covered off my next question, actually. So I'm going to move on and I'm going to ask you both, let's say that a buyer has exchanged contracts, so they're near the end of the process, but they can't move and complete because of self-isolating or, a potential lockdown situation. What penalties might come with delaying completion beyond a certain point, if any?
Well,
go on, Lorraine, sorry.
Yeah, well, the big one there really, Nikki, is if the parties have, for example, perhaps exchanged more recently, and we're entering the current lockdown again. Fundamentally, if the contract hasn't got anything in it allowing for delay, fundamentally, what we call the standard conditions of sale, they don't have any wriggle room really. So a party who is unable to complete, however sympathetic one might be about the reason, or however worthy and understandable the reason, that party fundamentally will be in breach of contract, and the innocent party, the party who was ready, willing and able to proceed, is allowed to serve what's called a notice to complete, Nikki, and that will give the defaulting party 10 working days within which to complete. And if completion hasn't happened within that time frame, the innocent party can bring the contract to an end. And of course, if the innocent party is the seller, they get to keep their buyer's 10% deposit. So it's a serious thing. Now, there have been a lot of so-called COVID clauses that people have talked about to put into conveyancing contracts, and I do think that's a really important discussion for clients to have with their conveyancers. Probably too much to talk about in this relatively short chat, Nikki, but my professional view, for what it's worth, is those COVID clauses aren't without difficulty, because of course what you're trying to do then is put something in a contract which is usually very tight, very clean, very tidy. Everybody knows where they stand. It might seem a bit harsh, but with you've at least got certainty. But of course, if you're trying to essentially bring in legitimate wriggle room to a contract with these COVID clauses, that can also get very difficult, because the bottom line is, if somebody can't complete because they're self-isolating, Nikki, well, how do you prove that? Now, I'm not saying that conveyancers shouldn't be trying to negotiate something. They absolutely should be having a conversation with their clients, but it's really, from a legal point of view, quite a difficult thing to achieve. And of course, the reality also is, if you've got a longer chain, actually all the parties in the chain should have the same COVID provisions in their contract. And again, that can be quite a difficult thing to achieve. So certainly what we're seeing is more people perhaps prepared, Nikki, to break a chain, more sellers prepared to go ahead on their sale to get that one in the bag, and maybe move into rented if they can, or move into temporary accommodation, rather than tying a purchase that they recognise might take a lot longer.
Yeah, sure.
I think there's something else to add there as well, Nikki. So just so the viewers know, when you're buying a property and we're doing the legal work, we're working towards the exchange of contracts. So the exchange of contracts is the point when both a buyer and a seller are legally bound to buy and sell, and the completion date could be a week, could be 2 weeks after that. The other option is, of course, that we do not exchange and we simultaneously exchange and complete on the same day. That would be the way around somebody worrying about potentially isolating or COVID clauses, or just looking to proceed without the risk.
Yeah, okay. So minimising the risk, encourage people to exchange and complete same day.
Yeah, I mean, it's not without its risks. It's not without its risks, but at the end of the day, Nikki, what a lot of people don't realise is our job as conveyancers is to explain the risks to our clients, and then say, you tell us what you would like to do based on our advice. A lot of people, if I had £1 for every client that said to me, Lorraine, what would you do? Well, what I personally would do isn't what's relevant. Our job is to say to the client, this is the risk. And of course, if any lawyers are watching this, some of them will shout at the screen and say, well, yes, simultaneous is rubbish, because of course you've got no contract. So if we all agree that we're going to complete a week on Friday and we don't, well, there's no legal recourse. But that's kind of the point that Stu's just made. But so in a way, you might want to see a simultaneous exchange and completion perhaps as the least worst option in a pandemic. But I have to say it's pretty straightforward, and it's fair to say that if people, buyers and sellers generally right now are very keen to get going, and you've got pretty serious, pretty committed clients who actually, if we all said we're going to try and exchange and complete a week on Friday, I think the vast majority would try to bring that about.
Definitely. Okay, so now I want to pick your brains on this stamp duty holiday, because if you guys are anything like us, things have been really busy given the stamp duty holiday. So I wanted to know what advice you might have for purchasers if they've not completed by the 31st of March. So that means they're going to miss out on the stamp duty holiday. Is there any protection for them? What advice can you give?
Well, the answer to that question is simply no. At the moment, unless somebody has completed their transaction before the end of March, then they will not be eligible to take advantage of the stamp duty holiday. So at that point, there is nothing more they can do. It is possible the government might extend this holiday, but obviously nobody at this moment in time knows the answer to that. No. The only way for a buyer or indeed a seller really to prepare for that situation, and of course, as you've alluded to, everybody's so busy at the moment that that's only going to escalate and increase, I suggest, in January and February, where people are more aware that the holiday's coming to a close. So everybody really does need to get their own sort of house in order. And what I mean by that is, whether it's obtaining a mortgage, whether it's conducting legal work, there will be certain things that any buyer will need to do from sort of their side of the fence, and that means collating sort of bank statements showing their deposit monies being in situ. It means collating ID, getting everything ready. In terms of selling, there are standard forms that they can complete when they put their property on the market. So really, it's just a case of doing as much work as possible as early as possible. Don't wait until you've found a buyer, or don't wait till you've found a property to then scramble around and try and find those bank statements and those bits of paper that prove where your money came from. It's doing as much as you possibly can as early as you can to give yourself the best chance of meeting that deadline.
Yeah. What's interesting, Nikki, is that sort of your questions are all kind of interlinked, really, because as what Stu's just said, that absolutely then harks back to your first question, you know, what's the biggest challenge? And as Stu said, actually, it's managing client expectation and it's communication. So the reality is, if we don't get instructed, if PCS Legal don't get instructed on a matter, you know, till the end of Jan, beginning of Feb, you know, Stu and all of his colleagues and staff are going to be saying, you know, in great big huge 2-foot high letters, you know, we make absolutely no guarantees that you're going to be completed by the stamp duty land tax holiday. As I say, as Stu said, unless it's extended, of course, but but also what's quite interesting, again, perhaps from your audience's point of view, Nikki, is that absolutely right across the property press, which of course, you know, our lovely clients won't be looking at and won't be reading, is there's lots out there now that's sort of saying, thanks for that, Stu. Lots out there that's sort of basically saying, you know, buyers and sellers, if you haven't got your act together now, if you haven't got your house on the market, or if you haven't chosen something to buy now, you know, now, you're unlikely to be sorting yourselves out by the stamp duty at the end of the stamp duty holiday. So traditionally, and maybe we, you know, clearly we're not in a traditional year, but of course a lot of people probably won't even think about this sort of thing until the Christmas holiday. You know, a lot of people will be looking for something to do on Boxing Day and start fannying about on Rightmove. You know, the narrative in our world for quite some time, Nikki, has been that's probably too late for a lot of people. If you're selling and you haven't got your house listed until early Jan, you're really going to be struggling to, I mean, you know, everybody might hit pay dirt and get the odd you know, get the odd cash buyer pinging up, but sort of from your point of view, from your perspective, you know, you're involved sort of much earlier in the process than we are. Well, if you know, if people haven't got their mortgage offer in place, then clearly nothing's happening. And Stu said the other day to me, you know, the number of people that hassle him to exchange contracts when he hasn't yet got a mortgage offer is quite extraordinary. And maybe that's one message you could get out to your clients, you know, no mortgage offer, no exchangey. So you know, don't be rude to your conveyancer, because, you know, we just can't do it.
Definitely. And as well, to be honest, Stuart, what you mentioned about being prepared with documents, etc., I think that goes pandemic or no pandemic, just being as prepared as possible. You know, I always encourage clients to make sure that you've got an agreement in principle before you start viewing properties, instead of scrambling around trying to find a lender after you've agreed an offer. So yeah, I think being prepared is just generally good advice, no matter what kind of world we're living in.
Sounds simple, doesn't it? But it's definitely the way forward.
Definitely. Okay, so what advice would you give to buyers and sellers at the moment if they are purchasing during COVID? Just general advice.
I suppose, you know, as we've already alluded to in this conversation, the things to really take from watching this video are, make sure you have everything in order. So that means collating documents such as ID, bank statements, so that they can be served on your mortgage advisor, can be served on your legal representative. But also, don't panic. You know, at this stage, you know, you're buying a property, you're spending a significant amount of money. So we shouldn't, you know, display the legal due diligence that needs to be carried out on behalf of a client. You know, whether they save a few £1,000s on stamp duty or not, it shouldn't be to the detriment of the legal due diligence that we're about to carry out on that property, and making sure that they're not about to buy a problem. Because, you know, you might save a bit of stamp duty, but there's nothing worse than buying a property to move in to find out that, you know, there was a private road and you might have to contribute to it, or there could be service charge relating to a period prior to your ownership. You know, it's really, really important that, you know, people sort of place, you know, importance on the legal process, because it's not just a process and we don't just service it. You know, it's proper legal work, investigating the title, investigating the property that's being bought. So stamp duty holiday or no stamp duty holiday, it's very important that that process is allowed to take place. And just be realistic. You know, if you've found the property to buy and it's your dream home and you found it in January and February, doesn't mean, you know, you can't buy it just because, you know, you can't move in before the end of that period. It's unfortunate, but people do need to be realistic, and they need to understand, as I said near the start, the process is going to be 16 odd weeks. You know, Lorraine said that, you know, you might be lucky and you might have sort of a cash buyer that can do it quicker if you're a seller. But most of the time it's going to be that 16-week marker, possibly even longer. So people do need to take that into consideration at the start, just to manage their expectations.
Definitely. And Lorraine, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly I would say, you know, I absolutely endorse everything that Stu said. You know, I would urge clients to not shoot the messenger, because we are the people at the front line. And as Stu said, our job is to make sure people have got, rather boringly, what's called a good and marketable title. But as Stu said, you know, a buyer has got to, you know, when they're a buyer now, but they're going to be a seller in the future. And they, of course, don't want a problem with the property that they bought in the midst of a stamp duty COVID related pandemic to suddenly cause them a problem in 5 years' time when they come to sell. But you know, also for buyers in particular, as Stu said, I think don't panic, Mr. Mannering. Most people won't be old enough. They can go and look that up, can't they? They can Google it. Don't panic is a really important thing. Do your sums, work out what stamp duty, land tax saving you're actually going to make in reality. Because of course, probably the point I would make, and I'm no estate agent and I'm no financial advisor, and I'm not a valuer, so I'm probably not qualified to make this comment at all. But of course, one of the things the current scenario that we're in is doing is potentially sort of inflating prices. So sellers are thinking, well, I'm in a buyer's market, I'm going to put the price of this property up. So actually what buyers are saving on the stamp duty, land tax, they're probably actually losing in a way, because they're actually just paying more for the property. So, you know, one argument would be, think carefully about the figures, look carefully at the sums, and, you know, don't put in an offer, you know, just before the end of March, because, you know, that property might be, you know, you might get that property for quite a bit less, you know, in the middle of April. Would probably be something I would just ask people to get the calculators out and actually realistically speak to, you know, the likes of you, Nikki, to make sure, you know, they've got their sums in order.
Definitely. And what I'm taking away from that, as I'm sure viewers will as well, is that look at your job, you know, as a conveyancer, as being in their best interest, as opposed to just a necessary component to get the property.
Yeah, we absolutely have to. That's central to what we do, and that's, you know, it's a really brilliant point, actually, Nikki. We sort of forget it because we're in the middle of it all the time. That's our professional duty. Our duty is to act in the best interests of our client. And actually, I would invite, you know, other people who aren't lawyers in the process to take that on board, because, you know, I might have a client who's saying to me, please, Lorraine, don't tell anybody this, but X, Y, and Z. And therefore, I've got a duty of confidentiality. So with the greatest respect, Nikki, I can't tell you, and I can't tell the estate agents, and I can't tell anyone what my client's issue might be. So that's a different conversation. But in the midst of where we are now, you know, it's very important for people to remember that we all have a professional, you know, conveyancers have a professional duty, and confidentiality is one of them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. I am sure that the viewers have found that incredibly useful. So yeah, as I mentioned, Lorraine and Stuart have got a YouTube channel, which is Conveyancing Matters. So any more conveyancing resources that you might need, then do head over and check that out. But for now, let's get on with the rest of the show.